A young single mother sold flowers on the cobblestone streets to feed the son she raised alone. He, on the other hand, had fortune, influence, and all the privileges that money could buy, except the truth about his own past. Emma survived abandonment with a brave smile on her face and the scent of daisies as her daily companion. Matthew buried the thoughtless choices of his youth under expensive suits and decisions that left their mark. But everything changed when he caught the eye of Ethan, a fragile blonde boy with eyes as grey as a storm. In that moment, ghosts he had sworn to silence forever began knocking at the door of the present. An old lie, a love that barely had time to be born, a reunion marked by doubt, and by the possibility of something new, intense and true. But not everything is flowers. There is a woman willing to do anything to maintain control, and a devastating accusation that threatens to destroy not only a mother, but also the childhood of an innocent boy. This is not just a story about reunions. It's about love that insists on blooming. Even when everything seems to collapse, prepare your heart. You will feel every word. The summer sun tinged the streets of Cape Cod with gold, reflecting off the old cobblestones as Emma Taylor parked her yellow VW bus in the main square. With delicate gestures, she began to arrange buckets of flowers on the sidewalk, creating a vibrant rainbow in front of the colorful houses. "Ethan, sweetheart, can you pass me the sunflowers?" she asked, pushing away a strand of red hair that insisted on escaping from her messy bun. The 6-year-old boy, who was playing in the bus with a stuffed dinosaur, jumped out excitedly. His grey eyes, almost silver, sparkled as he carried, with great effort and care, the bucket of sunflowers. "Mom, why do sunflowers always look at the sun?" he asked, with his head slightly tilted and curiosity alive in his gaze. Emma smiled, the shy freckles dancing on her cheeks. "Because they know where to find the light, my love. They always follow what makes them grow." "Did we come to Cape Cod for that too?" he asked, as only children know how to do, connecting simple questions to difficult truths. Emma paused for a moment, her apron soaked with water and floral perfume. The question was sweet, but it carried the weight of a past that she still didn't have the strength to reveal. "Yes," she finally answered. "We came to find our place in the sun." The reality, however, was much harder. 7 years earlier, Emma was just a biology student in Boston, full of plans to save the world with environmental projects. But a single night changed everything. During a university party, she met James, a man with a charming smile, who said he was just passing through. They talked about stars, dreams, life, and they lived a brief, intense romance full of silent promises. Weeks later, Emma discovered she was pregnant, but James had already disappeared. No last name, no phone number, no trace, as if he had never existed. She searched for him in vain, believing for months that it had all been real. When she told her parents, she was rejected mercilessly. Alone, humiliated, she found refuge in Cape Cod, a small town where no one knew her, a place to start over, to plant hope, even among the stones, to raise her son in peace, but touristy enough to support her small flower business. "Look, Mom, that man is watching us." Ethan's voice brought her back to the present. Emma raised her eyes in the direction her son was pointing. On the other side of the square, leaning against one of the lampposts, was a man who completely stood out from the environment. Wearing an impeccably tailored dark suit, sunglasses, and with a serious expression, he looked more like a lost executive than a common tourist. "Don't point, Ethan," she gently reprimanded him. "He must be just another visitor getting to know the town." The man, however, began to walk toward them. There was something in his confident, almost arrogant posture that made Emma feel an inexplicable pang of familiarity. "Good morning," he said as he approached, removing his sunglasses. "These flowers are truly impressive." Emma was momentarily speechless. His eyes, an intense dark green, contrasted with his carefully tousled brown hair. There was something in that gaze that triggered a strange sensation, like a distant memory trying to emerge. "Thank you," she finally replied, regaining her composure. "They're all grown in our small greenhouse on the outskirts of town." "You grow them yourselves?" he asked, genuinely impressed, bending down to Ethan's height. "And little man, do you help with the flowers too?" "Yes, sir. I know all their names in English and in scientific ease," Ethan replied proudly. The man smiled, a smile that completely transformed his serious expression. "Scientific ease? That's impressive." "It's Latin, actually," Emma gently corrected. "Ethan has an E." Incredible memory for scientific names. Sometimes I think I'll have a little botanist in the house. "Or a great flower entrepreneur," retorted the man, still looking at Ethan with an expression that was difficult to decipher. "My name is Matthew Anderson," he finally said, extending his hand to Emma. "I'm staying in town for a few weeks. I think I'll need flowers to brighten up my hotel room." "Emma Taylor," she replied, shaking his outstretched hand. A slight tingling ran up her arm at the brief contact. "And this is my son, Ethan." Matthew observed the boy for a few more moments, a slight frown crossing his face. "He has very peculiar eyes. They remind me of my family's." Emma felt an inexplicable discomfort. Must be a coincidence. They say there are only a few possible gene combinations, right? "Certainly," Matthew agreed, turning his attention back to the flowers. "I'll take those white lilies, if you don't mind." While Emma prepared the bouquet, Ethan continued chatting, animatedly with the stranger, showing his knowledge of flowers and asking if Matthew had children. The boy's spontaneity always surprised Emma. He spoke to anyone with the same openness and curiosity, perhaps unconsciously seeking the absent father figure in every man he met. "No, I don't have children," Matthew replied, with a shadow of melancholy in his voice. "My life has been too complicated for that." "My life is complicated too," offered Ethan, with the innocent wisdom of children. "I don't have a dad, just a mom, but she's worth two." Emma felt her face burn. "Ethan, that's a very personal conversation to have with strangers." Matthew, however, didn't seem bothered. On the contrary, there was kindness in his gaze when he answered, "Your mom seems really amazing. You make a great team." After paying for the flowers, leaving a generous tip that Emma tried to refuse, Matthew said goodbye, promising to return the next day to buy more arrangements for his hotel room. "He seemed sad, didn't he, Mom?" commented Ethan as they watched him walk away. "But he also seemed nice. I liked him." Emma nodded distractedly, still trying to understand the strange sensation that encounter had provoked. There was something vaguely familiar about Matthew Anderson, something she couldn't precisely identify. In the days that followed, Matthew became a frequent customer. He always appeared at the same time, bought a different arrangement, and chatted briefly with Ethan, who eagerly awaited his visits. To Emma's surprise, the reserved businessman began to bring small educational gifts for the boy: an illustrated book on botany, a small pocket telescope to observe the stars, a magnifying glass to examine flowers in detail. "You don't need to do this," Emma protested after the fourth visit, when Matthew brought a children's microscope kit. "You're spoiling Ethan too much." "I don't see how encouraging scientific curiosity can be spoiling," Matthew replied with a half-smile. "Besides, it's rare to find a child so interested in learning." There was something in the way Matthew looked at Ethan, a mixture of fascination and a deeper feeling that Emma couldn't name, that left her simultaneously touched and apprehensive. On a particularly hot afternoon, Matthew appeared outside his usual time. Emma was closing the VW bus, ready to take Ethan to the beach, when she spotted him crossing the square. "I thought you had already left," he said, looking slightly disappointed. "We're closing early today. I promised Ethan a swim in the ocean after a full week of work," explained Emma, noticing that Matthew had exchanged his usual suit for more casual clothes. light linen pants, and a navy blue shirt that enhanced his eyes. "May I join you?" The question caught Emma by surprise. "Forgive my boldness, but I spent the entire morning in suffocating meetings, and the idea of a swim sounds like paradise right now." Before she could formulate a response, Ethan had already jumped out of the bus, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Please, Mom, can Mr. Matthew come with us?" Emma hesitated. They were developing a kind of friendship with this stranger, but a beach trip seemed to cross some invisible line of intimacy that she wasn't sure she wanted to cross. "I promise to behave," joked Matthew, noticing her hesitation, "and I can buy ice cream to make up for the intrusion." Ethan's hopeful smile was the deciding factor. "All right, but go in your own car. The bus is already loaded with our equipment." Norset Beach, a few miles from the center, was relatively empty that weekday afternoon. Ethan immediately ran to the water, while Emma organized a small area with towels and a beach umbrella. "Has he always had that energy?" asked Matthew, watching the boy jump between the small waves. "Since he was born," confirmed Emma, a loving smile softening her features. "Even as a baby, he hardly slept. He was always alert, wanting to see everything." "It must have been difficult raising a child alone," Matthew commented carefully. Emma tensed slightly. She rarely talked about her situation with strangers, but something about Matthew made her feel strangely comfortable sharing. It is, but it's also the greatest joy of my life," she answered sincerely. "Ethan gave me a purpose when I was lost." Matthew seemed to want to ask more, but he restrained himself. Instead, he took off his shirt and ran to join Ethan in the water, leaving Emma momentarily breathless. The businessman's well-defined body revealed a dedication to exercise that didn't match the workaholic executive image she had formed. Watching them play in the water, Emma felt a pang of emotion. She rarely had the opportunity to see her son interact like this with a male figure. Seeing Ethan laughing while Matthew threw him up and caught him in the water was simultaneously beautiful and painful, a glimpse of what could have been if James hadn't disappeared from their lives. When they finally came out of the water, Ethan was exhausted and hungry. Matthew fulfilled his promise and brought ice cream for everyone, sitting next to Emma while the boy devoured his popsicle. "He's really extraordinary," commented Matthew, watching Ethan draw shapes in the sand with a stick. "Intelligent, curious, gentle. You've done an amazing job, Emma." "Thank you," she replied, genuinely touched by the compliment. "But much of it is simply who he is. I'm lucky to be the mother of someone so special." "And the father?" He hesitated, clearly uncertain if the question would be welcome. Emma took a deep breath, looking at the horizon. "He's not in his life. Never has been. I'm sorry. Don't be. Ethan and I are doing fine like this." She paused, uncertain about how much to share. "It was a brief story. I don't even know if the name he gave me was real." Matthew frowned, seeming genuinely disturbed. "That's regrettable. No man should run away from his responsibilities like that." There was something in the intensity of his reaction that made Emma look at him more closely. "You speak as if you have personal experience with the subject." "My own father wasn't exactly a model of responsibility," he replied after a moment. "He preferred his business and lovers to his family. I grew up watching my mother suffer from his absences and betrayals." The unexpected vulnerability of the confession caught Emma off guard. This man of cold and controlled appearance had his own scars, as deep as hers. "Is that why you don't have children? Fear of repeating patterns?" she asked softly. Matthew smiled humorlessly. "Perceptive analysis for someone who has known me for such a short time. But yes, maybe that's part of the reason. The other part is simply never having found the right person." "Mom! Mr. Matthew, look what I found!" Ethan's excited voice interrupted the moment of intimacy. The boy was running toward them, carefully holding something in his small hands. "A starfish!" he exclaimed, showing the small orange animal. "Can we take it home?" "No, sweetheart," Emma replied gently. "It belongs to the sea. It would be like taking a flower from the ground. It wouldn't survive away from its home." "Your mum is right," agreed Matthew, crouching down to examine the discovery, "but we can take a picture for you to remember and then return it to the sea." Ethan's face lit up at the suggestion. Matthew took his phone from his pocket and photographed the boy carefully, holding the marine animal, then accompanied him to the water's edge to return it to the sea. Watching them, Emma felt something change inside her. In less than 2 weeks, this stranger had entered their lives and seemed to naturally fill spaces she hadn't even realized were empty. It was scary how easily Ethan had become attached to him, and even scarier the way she herself was beginning to long for his daily visits. When they returned to the bus, Ethan fell asleep almost instantly in the back seat, exhausted from the adventure. "Thank you for the day," said Emma as Matthew said goodbye next to his car, a discreet but clearly luxurious SUV parked nearby. "Ethan loved your company." "The feeling is mutual," replied Matthew, his gaze lingering on the sleeping boy. "He reminds me a lot of myself as a child, the same insatiable curiosity, the same eyes." He paused abruptly, as if he had said too much. "Something wrong?" asked Emma, noticing his suddenly disturbed expression. "No, nothing," he replied quickly, "just memories. Emma, I need to travel on business for a few days, but I'd like to invite you both to dinner when I return, as a thank you for the pleasant afternoon." The proposal caught her off guard. "Matthew, I don't know if that's a good idea. We barely know each other." "It's just dinner," he insisted softly, "in a public restaurant. I promise I have no ulterior motives." There was something in his gaze, an almost vulnerable sincerity, that made Emma give in. "All right, but nothing too elegant. Ethan doesn't have formal clothes." "I know the perfect place." Matthew smiled, seeming genuinely happy with her agreement. "I'll be back in a week. Until then, I'll miss the flowers and the conversations." As she drove back home with Ethan sleeping peacefully, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had changed that day. What had begun as a simple commercial customer-vendor relationship was evolving into something deeper, and as much. As she tried to convince herself otherwise, she couldn't ignore the growing attraction she felt for Matthew Anderson, nor the way her heart raced every time he smiled. More disturbing still was the vague sense of familiarity that occasionally assaulted her when she observed him, as if she had already known him in another life or in another time, a persistent déjà vu that she couldn't explain. What Emma couldn't imagine was that while driving to his hotel, Matthew was facing his own demons. In the rearview mirror, the image of Ethan sleeping peacefully in the bus persisted in his mind, awakening questions and suspicions he had never considered before, and that could forever change the course of their lives. Matthew watched the mountainous landscape through the airplane window, but his mind was miles away. Since leaving Cape Cod 3 days ago, he couldn't stop thinking about Emma and Ethan, especially Ethan. There was something about the boy that deeply disturbed him, an inexplicable resemblance that went beyond the blue-grey eyes, so similar to those he saw in old photographs of his childhood. It was his manner, his curiosity, even the shape of his smile. "Mr. Anderson, we're beginning our descent into Boston," informed the flight attendant, interrupting his thoughts. Matthew nodded mechanically. The business trip that should have lasted a full week had been drastically shortened. He had cancelled important meetings, delegated urgent tasks to subordinates, all to be able to return to Cape Cod as quickly as possible. "I need to ask some questions," he muttered to himself while adjusting his seatbelt. But what would be the right questions? How to approach such a delicate suspicion without offending Emma or seeming completely insane? "Hello, did we happen to meet 7 years ago at a university party where I introduced myself with another name?" There was no elegant way to do this. Moreover, Matthew wasn't sure if he wanted answers. The last few years had been dedicated to rebuilding his image and that of the family business, moving completely away from the irresponsible young man he once was, the James who invented identities at university parties to escape the weight of being an Anderson. In his apartment in Boston, Matthew opened the safe built into the wall of his office and removed a small wooden box. Inside, he kept few objects of sentimental value. Among them, a small frame with his photo at age 6, taken during a trip to Paris. The resemblance to Ethan was undeniable. His phone rang, interrupting the moment of contemplation. The name Victoria was flashing on the screen. "Where are you?" Victoria Reed's voice sounded irritated. "You cancelled dinner with the investors without notice." "I had an unexpected situation," Matthew replied dryly. Victoria was technically his ex-fiancée, although they continued to work together in the company, and she seemed convinced that the break they had decided to give the relationship was only temporary. "What kind of unexpected situation is more important than the merger with the Rivera Group?" she questioned. "A personal matter, Victoria. I'll return to Cape Cod early tomorrow." "Cape Cod? I thought the evaluation of the inn was already completed. What else is there that requires your personal presence?" The question, loaded with suspicion, made Matthew realize how much his relationship with Victoria had deteriorated. There was no more trust, only professional demands and expectations. "I need to verify some details of the property," he lied, not ready to share his suspicions. "We'll talk when I get back." After hanging up, Matthew spent hours researching on his computer. First, he tried to find online records of Emma Taylor. He discovered an abandoned academic profile at Boston University, Faculty of Biology, with a photo that confirmed it was definitely the same Emma. The dates matched. 7 years ago, he was still living his rebellious phase, attending university parties where no one knew him as Matthew Anderson, the problematic heir. That specific year, he vaguely remembered a party in the biology department where he met a red-headed student with green eyes. The memory was foggy, a result of the drinks and the disorderly life he led, but he recalled the instant connection, the deep conversations about the stars, how she seemed genuinely interested in publicist James, not in the Anderson money. "My God," he murmured, the reality of the situation finally hitting him completely. He could be my son. In Cape Cod, Emma was arranging the flowers in the bus when Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly lady who sold crafts in the neighboring square, approached with a curious expression. "So, girl, is it true that you and the businessman from the city are having a romance?" Emma almost dropped a vase of orchids. "What? Of course not. Where did you get that idea?" "Well, the whole town is talking. Sarah from the bakery saw you at the beach. All smiles and intimacy, and he comes to buy flowers every day. A man who buys flowers daily is either in love or has a guilty conscience." Emma felt her face burn. "Matthew is just a customer. We met him at the beach by coincidence, that's all." "If you say so." Mrs. Jenkins smiled mischievously. "But he would be a good catch, wouldn't he? A handsome, educated, and from what they say, very rich man." "I'm not looking for a good catch, Mrs. Jenkins. I'm too busy raising my son and managing my business." The conversation was interrupted by Ethan's arrival, returning from school with his teacher, Jessica, who occasionally accompanied him to the bus. "Look what I drew today, Mom," exclaimed the boy, proudly displaying a colorful drawing. "It's our family." Emma observed the image. 3 stick figures, one with curly red hair, a small one with blonde hair, and a third, taller one, with what appeared to be a suit. "It's very beautiful, darling," she carefully replied. "But who is this?" she asked, pointing to the figure of the man. "It's Mr. Matthew, of course," replied Ethan, as if it were obvious. "Jessica asked us to draw our family, and since I don't have a dad, I drew Mr. Matthew. He's cool like a dad would be, isn't he?" Emma exchanged an embarrassed look with the teacher, who smiled apologetically. "Sweetheart, Matthew is just a friend we met recently," Emma explained gently. "He's not part of our family." The disappointment on Ethan's face was like a stab. "But he could be, couldn't he? You smile differently when he's around. You smile like my friends' mums do when their dads come home." Emma was left speechless, surprised by her son's perceptive observation. "Children notice more than we imagine," Jessica commented quietly, while Ethan distracted himself showing the drawing to Mrs. Jenkins. "He talks about this Matthew constantly at school." "We've known each other for less than 2 weeks," sighed Emma. "And he's from another world. A businessman from Boston, probably just passing the time while concluding his business in town." "Well, judging by the car that just parked over there, he returned earlier than expected," replied Jessica, pointing discreetly. Emma turned and saw Matthew getting out of his SUV on the other side of the square. He had exchanged his usual suit for khaki pants and a simple white shirt, looking more relaxed, but at the same time strangely tense. "Mr. Matthew!" Ethan's enthusiastic shout attracted everyone's attention in the square. The boy ran toward the businessman, who broke into a broad smile at the sight of him, crouching down to receive him with a hug. "Hello, champion! I missed you," said Matthew, affectionately ruffling the boy's hair. "You came back early. Mom said you wouldn't be back until next week," commented Ethan, pulling him by the hand toward the bus. "I changed my plans," replied Matthew, his gaze meeting Emma's from a distance. There was something different in that look, a disturbing intensity, almost investigative. As they approached, Emma noticed that Matthew seemed different. It wasn't just the more casual clothes, but something in his posture, in the way he observed her, as if seeing her for the first time. "Welcome back," she greeted, trying to keep her voice casual. "Ethan will be happy to have you around. He hasn't stopped talking about Mr. Matthew in the last few days." "We need to talk," he replied in a low voice, just for her to hear. "In private." The seriousness in his tone made Emma frown. "Did something happen?" "Yes, no, maybe." Matthew ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that seemed out of place in someone normally so composed. "It's complicated." "Mr. Matthew, look at the drawing I made at school," interrupted Ethan, momentarily saving them from the uncomfortable moment. Matthew examined the drawing, and Emma could see the instant emotion in his eyes when he realized who the third figure was. He swallowed hard, clearly touched. It's amazing, Ethan. You have talent," he finally said, his voice slightly choked. "Can we go to dinner today?" "You promised before you traveled," the boy reminded him, pulling on his shirt sleeve. Matthew looked at Emma as if asking permission. She nodded slightly. Perhaps because James and Matthew seemed completely different people, one relaxed and charming, the other serious and controlled. Or perhaps because she had never expected to find Ethan's father, especially not as a rich businessman, buying flowers in Cape Cod. The next day, Emma was organizing the flowers in the bus when she noticed a discreet envelope between the buckets. Inside, she found a folder with legal documents, voluntary recognition of paternity, a child support proposal, and a handwritten letter. "Emma, I understand your shock and your anger. I don't intend to force my presence in your lives, but I also can't simply disappear now that I know the truth. I've attached some documents for you to analyze when you're ready. I'll be at the hotel for 2 more weeks. The decision about how to proceed is entirely in your hands. Matthew." The formality of the letter contrasted with the magnitude of its content. Emma quickly put away the documents when she saw Ethan approaching with Jessica. "Hello, sweetheart. How was school today?" "Cool. We did experiments with plants. I wanted to show Mr. Matthew. Is he coming today?" Before Emma could answer, a female voice interrupted. "Matthew is busy with more important matters than flowers and children." Emma turned to find an elegant woman approaching, tall, perfectly styled black hair, impeccable makeup, and designer clothes that seemed absurdly out of place on the cobblestone streets of Cape Cod. "You must be Victoria," said Emma, instinctively positioning herself between the woman and Ethan. "And you must be Matthew's latest distraction," replied Victoria with a cold smile. "Impressive how he always finds charity cases wherever he goes. Ethan, why don't you and Jessica go buy an ice cream?" Emma handed some bills to the teacher, who noticed the tension and promptly took the boy away. When they were alone, Emma faced Victoria directly. "What do you want?" "Just to clarify some points," replied the woman, examining the flowers with disdain. "Matthew goes through these philanthropic phases occasionally. He helps the less fortunate, feels good about himself, and then returns to reality. Don't delude yourself thinking it's anything more than in that." Emma felt her blood boil, but maintained her composure. "I appreciate your concern, but my relationship with Matthew is none of your business." "Oh, but it is. You see, Matthew and I have a commitment that goes beyond our personal relationship. Anderson Enterprises depends on our partnership. Mrs. Eleanor, the matriarch, has already defined the future of the company, which involves our marriage." "If you're so committed, why did he break up with you?" questioned Emma, unable to contain the sarcasm. Victoria's smile faltered for an instant. "A small, temporary misunderstanding. Matthew is under a lot of pressure and needed space, but we'll soon return to what was planned." "Well, that's between you two," replied Emma, trying to end the uncomfortable conversation. "Now, if you don't mind, I have work to do." Victoria took a step forward, deliberately invading Emma's personal space. "Let me be clear. I don't know what you want from him. Money, status, perhaps a father for your son. But it won't work. The Andersons protect what's theirs, and Matthew belongs to that world, a world that clearly isn't yours." Before Emma could respond, a male voice interrupted. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" Matthew was approaching with large strides, his expression a mixture of shock and contained fury. Beside him, Ethan happily skipped along, holding a chocolate ice cream. "Matthew, darling," Victoria instantly composed a sweet smile. "Just meeting your florist friend, Cape Cod. Is so charming with its quaint local businesses." The look Matthew gave her could have frozen the ocean. "I need to talk to you. In private." "Of course, love. I'll finish my cultural tour later." Matthew turned to Emma, his gaze softening. "Are you okay?" "Perfectly," she replied coldly. Victoria's presence only confirmed her suspicions. Matthew belonged to a completely different world, a world with intimidating ex-fiancés and overwhelming family expectations. Watching him walk away with Victoria, Emma felt the weight of reality fall on her shoulders. No matter the sincerity in Matthew's words about wanting to be part of Ethan's life, there were much greater forces at play, forces that could crush both her and her son if she wasn't careful. That night, while Ethan slept, Emma reread the documents left by Matthew. The child support figures were astronomical, more money than she had ever seen. But that wasn't what worried her. The real issue was much more complex: how to introduce Matthew into Ethan's life without confusing the boy or creating expectations that could be destroyed. How to trust a man who had already lied once, who belonged to a world where women like Victoria defined who was worthy and who wasn't. And, most disturbing of all, how to ignore the feelings she was beginning to develop for Matthew, feelings that went far beyond the connection through Ethan. Sunday morning dawned sunny in Cape Cod. Emma, however, had barely slept. The revelations of the last few days weighed on her thoughts as she prepared breakfast, watching Ethan drawing at the small kitchen table, oblivious to the emotional storms forming around him. "Mom, can we go to the park today?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the colorful paper. "I want to show Mr. Matthew my new kite." Emma took a deep breath, gathering courage for the conversation she could no longer postpone. "Ethan, We need to talk about Mr. Matthew. The boy immediately raised his eyes, attentive. Emma sat down in front of him, searching for the right words. Remember when you asked me about your father, and I said he lived very far away? Ethan nodded slowly. You said he didn't know about me, that he had gone away before he knew I was in your tummy. That's right. What if I tell you that your father has returned, that he discovered about you and wants to meet you? Ethan's blue-grey eyes widened. My father came back? Really? Where is he? What is he like? The anxiety in his voice was palpable, making Emma's heart clench. You already know him, sweetheart. It's Matthew. The silence that followed was profound. Ethan blinked several times, processing the information. Then, to Emma's surprise, a huge smile lit up his face. I knew it! Deep down I knew it! He exclaimed, jumping from his chair in excitement. That's why he's so nice to me. That's why we have the same eyes. Mum, my dad is Mr. Matthew. The boy's genuine joy caught Emma off guard. She had expected confusion, perhaps hurt for having hidden the truth, but not this instant and enthusiastic acceptance. Ethan, it's important to understand that it's a bit more complicated. Matthew didn't know about you until recently. He and I met a long time ago, before he was who he is today. But now he knows. Right. And he wants to be my dad. The hope in Ethan's voice was almost painful to hear. He wants to get to know you better, yes. Can I call him Dad now? The innocent question made Emma hesitate. Maybe it's better to wait a bit until you get to know each other better. For now, keep calling him Mr. Matthew, okay? Ethan agreed, although clearly disappointed. Can we see him today? I want to show him all my drawings and my books and tell him that he's my dad. Let's take it slow, my love. First, let's finish breakfast. Then you can help me with the flowers in the greenhouse. Later, we'll see if we can talk to Matthew, okay? Meanwhile, Matthew was walking along the seafront of Cape Cod, trying to organize his thoughts. The confrontation with Victoria the day before had been exhausting. After getting her away from Emma, he had taken her to the hotel and made it absolutely clear that their relationship was definitely over and that her interference was unacceptable. You can't seriously be considering getting involved with that florist, Victoria had responded with disdain. What would your mother say? The board? The shareholders? I don't care, Matthew had replied, with a conviction that surprised. Even himself. For the first time in my life, I'm making decisions based on what's right, not what's convenient for business or for the family image. Victoria had left Cape Cod that same night, but not before threatening. This isn't over, Matthew. There's much more at stake than you imagine. Now, watching the waves break on the beach, Matthew was trying to formulate a plan. Emma had every right to distrust him. He had disappeared, even without knowing about the pregnancy. He had lied about his identity. Regaining her trust would be a challenge, but he was determined to try. More urgent still was establishing a relationship with Ethan, his son. The idea still left him dazed. For years, he had avoided fatherhood, convinced that he wouldn't be able to be better than his own father, who was absent. And now, he discovered that he was already the father of a brilliant, kind and curious boy who had somehow grown magnificently without his presence. His phone vibrated in his pocket. His mother's name, Eleanor Anderson, was flashing on the screen. He hesitated before answering. The news about Victoria had certainly already reached her. Matthew, what is this story Victoria told me? Eleanor's authoritative voice dispensed with greetings. A florist and a child in Cape Cod. Have you completely lost your mind? Good morning to you too, Mother, he replied dryly. Victoria should learn not to meddle in matters that don't concern her. She's concerned about you, as we all are. This erratic behavior, cancelling important meetings, extending your stay in a tourist town. Mother, I have a son, interrupted Matthew, deciding there was no gentle way to communicate the news. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. "A 6-year-old boy," he continued, "the result of an encounter I had before going to London. I only discovered recently by coincidence." "Coincidence?" Eleanor's voice now sounded dangerously calm. "Or a well-elaborated trap? Matthew, you're an Anderson, heir to an empire. How many women have already tried to deceive you with similar stories?" The implication made Matthew's blood boil. "Emma is not that type of person. She didn't even know who I really was when we met. And you just need to look at Ethan to see that he's my son. He has the same eyes, the same chin, even the same gestures. Impressions can be deceptive. We need concrete evidence, DNA tests, background checks. I've already initiated the process for the DNA, but not because I doubt, just to legally formalize. As for background checks, I won't turn the mother of my son into a suspect of some imaginary crime." Eleanor sighed heavily. "Come to Boston immediately. We need to discuss this in person with the family lawyers. I'm not asking for your permission, Mother. I'm communicating a fact. I have a son, and I intend to be part of his life. And child support? I suppose she has already demanded astronomical figures." Matthew laughed humorlessly. "Actually, she refused my first offer. She said they didn't need my money." This finally seemed to silence Eleanor momentarily. "I'm hanging up now, Mother. I have a lot to resolve here." After the call, Matthew felt simultaneously exhausted and strangely light. The control that his family had exerted over him for years was weakening, not out of rebellion as in his youth, but for a greater purpose. His son. Lost in thought, he almost didn't notice the small blonde tornado running toward him on the beach. "Dad!" Ethan's enthusiastic shout echoed, making Matthew freeze in place. The boy threw himself into his arms with such force that it almost knocked them over. Automatically, Matthew embraced him, feeling a wave of emotion so intense that his eyes watered. "Mom told me. She told me that you're my dad." Ethan was speaking rapidly, practically jumping with excitement. "I knew it. I knew I had a dad somewhere." Matthew looked over his son's head and saw Emma approaching slowly. She seemed nervous, perhaps regretting the decision to tell the truth so quickly. "Ethan, what did we agree about calling Matthew Dad?" she asked softly when she approached. "But he is my dad," protested Ethan, refusing to let go of Matthew. "And now he knows. And I know, so I can call him that." Matthew met Emma's gaze, silently asking for guidance. She sighed, shrugging in surrender. "It seems someone has already made his decision," she said with a small, sad smile. "Come, let's sit down," suggested Matthew, pointing to a nearby wooden bench. With Ethan still firmly holding his hand, the three sat down, the boy purposely positioning himself between them. "I'm sorry," murmured Emma. "I thought it would be better to tell him soon, before he found out some other way. I didn't expect such an enthusiastic reaction." "Don't apologize," replied Matthew, still amazed at the situation. "I'm happy you told him." "Dad, are you going to live with us now?" asked Ethan abruptly. The innocent question provoked an awkward silence. Matthew searched for the right words. "Ethan, your mom and I are getting to know each other again," he carefully explained, "and I'm getting to know you too. All of this is new for all of us. For now, I'll continue staying at the hotel, but we can see each other every day if your mom allows." "But families live together," insisted Ethan, with the simple and direct logic of children. "Not all of them," Emma gently intervened. "Some families are different. The important thing is that people love and respect each other, even living in separate places." Ethan seemed to consider this for a moment. "So you don't love each other?" The question caught both adults off guard. "It's complicated, sweetheart," replied Emma, feeling her face burn. "Your mom and I met a long time ago, in very different circumstances," complimented Matthew. "Now we're meeting again and learning about how we are today. The most important thing is that we both love you." This seemed to satisfy Ethan. Momentarily, In the days that followed, they established a routine. Matthew visited regularly, bringing small educational gifts and gradually getting to know his son. Emma observed the interaction, surprised by the ease with which Ethan had accepted Matthew into his life. On a particularly difficult afternoon, Emma received an urgent phone call. Mrs. Jenkins, the lady who sold crafts near her bus, had been hospitalized after a sudden illness. "I need to go see her. Can you stay with Ethan?" Emma asked hesitantly. "Of course, we'll be fine," replied Matthew, trying to hide his own nervousness at the prospect of being alone with his son for the first time. During Emma's absence, father and son strengthened their connection. They made an improvised dinner, played board games, and Matthew patiently answered the numerous questions about his childhood, his family, and especially why he had been absent for so long. "I didn't know about you," he explained honestly. "If I had known, I would have come much sooner." "Mom tried to find you," revealed Ethan. "She told me she looked a lot, but you had disappeared." Guilt hit Matthew deeply. "I was irresponsible at the time, but I promise that now I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." When Emma returned at night, she found them asleep on the sofa, with a documentary about whales still playing on the television. "Thank you for staying," she said sincerely after Ethan went to bed. "I know it must have been strange to suddenly find yourself alone with him." "It was the best day of my life," confessed Matthew. "He's amazing, Emma, and that's your merit." A moment of intimacy hovered between them, not an echo of the past, but something new, born of the maturity that the years had brought. The peace, however, didn't last long. Days later, while organizing the flowers in the bus, Emma was approached by a man in a suit, visibly out of place in the casual environment of Cape Cod. "I'm Daniel Roberts, attorney for the Anderson family," he introduced himself, handing her an envelope. "This is a formal notification. Mrs. Eleanor Anderson is requesting the immediate execution of a DNA test and proposing a temporary visitation agreement." Emma felt her blood freeze in her veins. "We're managing well without legal documents so far." "Mrs. Anderson believes in formal procedures," replied the lawyer. "There's also a generous financial proposal to ensure the minor's well-being during this process." "I won't sign anything without talking to Matthew," she firmly declared, "and tell Mrs. Anderson that we're not for sale." Matthew returned from Boston furious upon discovering his mother's interference. "Emma, I swear I didn't know. She lured me to Boston with a false business emergency." Her lawyer appeared with visitation agreement documents. "Is this how your family handles things?" "Unfortunately, yes. I immediately confronted my mother. It was explosive. I told her that if she tried to interfere in my relationship with you and Ethan, I would give up everything, the companies, the inheritance, the Anderson name." "You wouldn't do that," replied Emma, skeptical. "I would, without hesitation." Matthew's gaze met hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "I've spent my entire life trying to be the perfect son, the ideal heir, putting the company's interests above my own happiness. I won't make that mistake with my own son." The situation became even more complicated when they discovered that Victoria was spreading rumors in the business circle, insinuating that Emma had set a trap to capture an Anderson. Simultaneously, Jessica, Ethan's teacher, reported that an elegant woman had visited the school, asking questions under the pretext of offering educational scholarships. "It's Victoria," confirmed Matthew. "She's collecting evidence, probably for some kind of custody lawsuit." The nightmare materialized on a sunny Thursday. Ethan wasn't at school when Emma went to pick him up. "He left with his father," the secretary casually informed. "Mr. Anderson came earlier, said there was a family emergency." The panic was instant. "I didn't authorize this, and Matthew is in a meeting in Newport today." With trembling hands, Emma called Matthew, who immediately returned to town. The small Cape Cod mobilized, fishermen checking the coast, merchants searching in every alley, tourists alerted about a missing blonde boy. It was at the beginning of the evening, when hope was beginning to fade, that Matthew's cell phone rang. "Matthew, it's me, Victoria. I'm with your son at the Atlantic Hotel." They found Ethan calmly watching cartoons and eating ice cream, apparently oblivious to the chaos he had caused. "Aunt Vicky was nice," he explained innocently. "She said she was a friend of yours and had a surprise." Victoria appeared impeccably dressed and with an expression of false surprise. "Oh, you arrived early. We were having such a pleasant afternoon." Matthew confronted her. "Furious. If you weren't in front of my son, I would show you exactly how much this has gone beyond any acceptable limit." Victoria didn't back down. Instead, she presented an envelope containing compromising photos of Matthew's past and documents about the family business, with annotations about possible irregularities. "If you accuse me of anything, these documents will go to the press and to the child welfare services," she threatened. "What I want is the presidency of Anderson Enterprises, the marriage you promised, and this small inconvenience kept at a distance." What Victoria didn't notice was Ethan silently recording the conversation with the cell phone that Matthew had recently given him for emergencies. "Aunt Vicky, why are you being mean to my dad and my mom?" asked the boy innocently. "I'm not being mean, darling. I'm just protecting what's important." "Like money?" Ethan continued with surprising insight. "You said on the phone that you were going to take all of my dad's money." Matthew immediately realized what was happening. "Did you record Aunt Victoria's conversation, Ethan?" Ethan nodded proudly. "You always say we should gather evidence when someone does something wrong." Victoria paled. "This is ridiculous. The word of a child against mine." "It's not just his word," retorted Matthew, taking the phone. "It's a recording. And believe me, Victoria, this is enough to destroy any chance you had of getting close to Anderson Enterprises again." Ethan's recording never needed to be made public. The simple threat was enough for Victoria to disappear from the scene, transferred to a distant branch of the company after a decisive conversation between Matthew and Eleanor. The Anderson matriarch, against all expectations, ended up visiting Cape Cod to meet her grandson. The encounter, initially tense, softened when Ethan, with his characteristic innocence, asked if she also liked flowers, offering her a small bouquet that he had selected himself. "He has the Anderson charm," commented Eleanor to Emma after dinner, in a rare moment of intimacy. "But he has your heart, your strength. You've done a beautiful job raising him." "Thank you," replied Emma, genuinely touched by the unexpected recognition. At the flower shop, a subtle transformation occurred. The bus parked in the central square was now just part of a larger operation. Matthew had helped Emma acquire her own space, not as a gift, but as a joint investment. Destiny Flowers became the official name of the business, which now supplied arrangements to hotels and events throughout the region. On a Sunday afternoon, while Ethan played on the beach under the watchful eye of Eleanor, who had surprisingly discovered a genuine pleasure in her grandson's company, Matthew took Emma for a walk through the historic center. "Remember the first day we met here?" he asked, stopping in the same square where the bus used to park. "How could I forget? You were the mysterious man in a suit observing my bus," replied Emma, smiling at the memory. "I was completely lost that day," confessed Matthew, "not just in town, but in life. And then I saw you, this extraordinary woman with fiery hair, surrounded by flowers, and with a boy who looked so much like me that I thought I was hallucinating." Emma laughed softly. "I thought you were just another rich tourist trying to add a touch of color to your hotel room." "And now? What do you think of me now?" asked Matthew, his voice suddenly serious. Emma considered the question, observing the man in front of her. No longer the elegant stranger, nor the irresponsible young man she had met in her youth, but someone who had proven day after day his determination to be better, to build something true. "I think you're the man who proved that second chances exist," she finally replied. "The man whom Ethan loves to call Dad. The man who, against all odds, made me believe in love again." Matthew took a small box from his pocket. "It's not an engagement ring," he explained before opening it. "It's still early for that, and we need to build our story at our own pace." Inside the box was a delicate chain with a sunflower-shaped pendant. "It's a promise," he continued, "that, like the sunflower, I will always seek the light that you and Ethan brought into my life." Emma allowed him to place the chain around her neck, the cold metal contrasting with the warmth spreading in her chest. "I don't know what the future holds for us," said Matthew, taking her hands in his. "There will be challenges, adaptations, difficult moments, but I know that I want to face each one of them by your side, building not just a family for Ethan, but a home for all of us." In response, Emma did what her heart had been desiring for weeks. She moved closer and kissed him, not a kiss of reunion with the past, but a kiss of promise for the future. In the distance on the beach, Ethan observed the two with Eleanor by his side. "See? I told you they loved each other," commented the boy, with the absolute certainty of children. Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that softened the severe lines of her face. "I think you were right from the beginning, Ethan. Now we're a complete family," he declared, turning his attention back to the sandcastle he was building. "Yes," agreed Eleanor, watching her son and Emma walking hand in hand through the square. "A complete family." And so, among the colourful flowers and stone streets of Cape Cod, a new story began to bloom. Not the perfect story of fairy tales, but a real story built on difficult truths, courageous choices, and above all, on love that, like the flowers that Emma cultivated, needed daily care, patience, and faith to reveal its full beauty. A public dinner, would be the ideal place for the private conversation he wanted to have. "Of course, champion. How about at 7? I know a seafront restaurant that serves delicious fish." After Matthew walked away, promising to pick them up later, Emma was restless for the rest of the afternoon. What did he want to talk about? Had he discovered something about her past? Was he bothered by the attachment Ethan was showing? At 6:30, already ready for dinner in a simple blue floral dress that enhanced her green eyes, Emma was helping Ethan put on his sneakers when the phone rang. "Hello, Ms. Taylor?" A cold, unfamiliar female voice sounded from the other end. "This is Victoria Reed, executive assistant to Matthew." "Anderson?" Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "Yes, how can I help you?" "Matthew asked me to let you know that he needed to cancel tonight's commitment. An emergency has arisen in Boston that requires his immediate presence." "Oh." The disappointment was instant, especially when thinking about how upset Ethan would be. "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." "I'd like to clarify something," continued the voice, now with a slightly threatening tone. "Matthew is at a crucial moment in negotiations for Anderson Enterprises. Distractions are inconvenient." "Distractions," repeated Emma, feeling her blood boil. "I don't know what you're talking about, but I can assure you we're not distracting anyone." "Great. Then we understand each other. Have a good night, Miss Taylor." The call ended before Emma could respond. Feeling humiliated and confused, she looked at Ethan, who was tying his shoelaces with his tongue sticking out, concentrated. "Honey, I have some not-so-great news. Matthew won't be able to come today." The boy's face crumbled. "But he promised. Sometimes adults have emergencies at work," explained Emma, feeling terrible. "But you know what we can do? Have our own special night. We can order pizza and watch that dinosaur movie you love so much." The proposal didn't completely erase the disappointment, but Ethan ended up agreeing. While they ate pizza on the small living room sofa, Emma couldn't stop thinking about the strange call. Who was this? Victoria Reed, and why call instead of Matthew himself? The threatening tone suggested more than a simple professional relationship. Her suspicion was confirmed when, after finally putting Ethan to bed, she heard knocking at the door. Upon opening it, she found Matthew looking agitated and confused. "What are you doing here? I thought you'd gone back to Boston," said Emma, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Ethan. "Boston? What are you talking about?" "I just went to take care of some details at the hotel so I could meet you," replied Matthew, clearly confused. "I came to pick you up for dinner. Your assistant, Victoria, called cancelling everything. She said you had an emergency." Matthew's expression instantly hardened. "Victoria is not my assistant. She's my ex-fiancée, and she had no authorization to speak on my behalf." Emma felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "Ex-fiancée? It's complicated," he replied, running his hand through his hair again. The nervous gesture that Emma was beginning to recognize. "May I come in? We need to talk, and clearly now there are more things to clarify." Reluctantly, Emma let him in. The small apartment above the flower shop she rented seemed even smaller with Matthew's imposing presence. She indicated the sofa and sat in the opposite armchair, maintaining a deliberate distance. "So you have an ex-fiancée who still acts as if she has rights over your life," began Emma, unable to hide the hurt in her voice. "And she clearly sees Ethan and me as threats. Victoria and I broke up 3 months ago, but we continue to work together in the company," replied Matthew, hesitant. "She has difficulty accepting the end of the relationship." "And why did you break up with her?" The question escaped before Emma could contain it. "Because I realized I was with her for the wrong reasons. Convenience, family pressure, professional compatibility." Matthew looked directly into Emma's eyes. There was no love, just arrangement. Silence weighed between them for a few moments. "That's not what I came to talk about," Matthew finally continued. "Emma, I need to ask you a question, and I ask that you be completely honest, no matter how strange it seems." Emma's heart accelerated. "What question?" "7 years ago," he began slowly, "were you at a party at the biology faculty of Boston University and met a man who introduced himself as James, a publicist?" The shock was so great that Emma had to hold on to the armchair to avoid falling. Her face instantly paled. How can you know that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because I was James," replied Matthew, his voice mixing confession and regret. "I went through a rebellious phase where I attended university parties using false identities. It was my way of escaping the pressure of being an Anderson." Emma stood up abruptly, staggering backward as if she had been slapped. "No, it can't be. This is some kind of sick joke." "It's not a joke. When I saw you in the square with Ethan, I felt something familiar, but I couldn't identify it. It was only after observing Ethan, noticing our similarities, that the memories began to return. You lied to me. You disappeared. I looked for you." Emma's voice rose dangerously before she remembered Ethan sleeping. "I looked for you for months," she continued in a furious whisper. "I didn't know," replied Matthew, clearly shaken. "I swear I didn't know there were consequences from that night. I was drunk, confused, and the next morning I was practically kidnapped by security guards my father hired to take me back home. He sent me to London the same week for a rehabilitation program." 7 years, Emma gritted her teeth, tears of anger shining in her eyes. "For 7 years I raised Ethan alone, abandoned by my family, struggling to survive, while you lived your privileged life without consequences." "I know that nothing I say can erase this," admitted Matthew, his voice loaded with regret. "But I'm here now, and I want to take my responsibility. Ethan is my son, isn't he?" The direct question disarmed Emma. It was the first time someone had verbalized this truth so clearly. Judging by your reaction when you see him, by the coincidence of dates, and by the sudden obsession you developed for us, you already know the answer," she replied bitterly. Matthew covered his face with his hands, a mixture of conflicting emotions evident in his posture. When he finally looked up, his eyes were moist. "He's amazing, Emma. You've done an extraordinary job. I don't need your compliments," she retorted, anger simmering on the surface. "What do you want now? To appear in his life after 7 years and pretend you've always been present?" "I want to be part of his life, in the way you allow, at the pace that's best for Ethan," replied Matthew calmly. "And I want to help you financially, to compensate for the years of absence." "We don't want your money," Emma instantly retorted. "I know you don't. That only proves how extraordinary you are." Matthew stood up, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm not asking you to decide anything now. I'm just asking you to consider what's best for Ethan. Every child deserves to know their father, don't you think?" The question hit Emma at her most vulnerable point. How many times had Ethan asked about his father? How many improvised stories had she told, promising that one day she would explain everything? "I need on time," she finally said. "This is too much to process in one night." "I completely understand," nodded Matthew. "I'll take some measures to officially confirm paternity, DNA tests, legal documents, but I promise not to do anything without your prior consent." When Matthew left, leaving his card with personal contact numbers, Emma collapsed on the sofa, trembling uncontrollably. The life she had carefully built was being turned upside down. "Mummy, why are you crying?" Ethan's sleepy voice caught her by surprise. The boy was standing at the bedroom door, holding his stuffed dinosaur, his eyes heavy with sleep. "It's nothing, my love," she lied, quickly wiping away the tears. "I'm just a little tired." "Did Mr. Matthew come?" "I heard voices." Emma hesitated, uncertain about how to respond. "Yes. He stopped by quickly to explain why he couldn't take us to dinner." "Will he come back tomorrow?" The hope in Ethan's voice was palpable, and Emma felt her heart tighten. This man had already won. Over her son, without even trying. What would it be like when Ethan discovered that Matthew was his biological father? "Maybe, darling. Now let's go back to bed, okay? We have a full day tomorrow." While tucking Ethan back in, Emma observed his sleeping little face. The similarities to Matthew were so obvious now, the shape of the eyes, the curve of the chin, even the way of furrowing his brows when concentrated. How had she not noticed before? Perhaps